They say you shouldn't let your career define who you are, but when you're a single mom starting over from zero, it doesn't really feel like a choice. My name is Claire Harper, I'm 39, and up until last week, I held the position of Senior Project Strategist at Carson & Blake, a rapidly expanding consulting firm in Chicago. I was the mastermind behind the project plan that secured them the $20 million Fallner Industries contract, the largest in the company's history. But that achievement won't appear anywhere in my personnel file. That's just how the real world operates. My boss chuckled as he slid the termination papers across his desk. "Don't take it personally," he said. He called it restructuring. I called it betrayal. The whole moment felt unreal. His office smelled of stale coffee mixed with pricey cologne, and the air conditioner droned loudly for a cold February morning. I stared at the papers before me, my ears ringing. After 5 years of crafting the firm's toughest strategies, after countless late nights and missed recitals and holidays with my daughter Ellie, I was being dismissed like a throwaway assistant, effective immediately. "I'm sorry, Claire," he said with a shrug that didn't fool anyone. "But we need fresh voices, new energy. You know how this goes." No, I didn't. Not like this. Not after everything I'd given them. I told myself to breathe, lifting my chin. I didn't want him to see my hands tremble. I refused to give him that. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said softly, standing up to leave. He looked taken aback by how calm I was. I bet he expected tears, anger, maybe even begging. But when you've rebuilt your life from scratch once, you learn how to walk away with your dignity, even if it feels like your lungs are collapsing. I didn't ask why he hadn't mentioned my project during the meeting. I didn't have to 2 weeks earlier. I had completed the Fallner proposal, the most complex, high-stakes pitch we'd ever tackled. I spent 3 months developing the strategy, analyzing data, aligning everything to their growth forecasts. It took every bit of my expertise. The day before the presentation, I saw the final version sitting on his desk. My name was nowhere to be found. "Don't worry, Claire," he'd said, brushing it off like it didn't matter. "This is just how things work. You'll get internal credit." I didn't argue then I should have now. I was being escorted out of the office by an HR woman I barely knew, clutching a cardboard box, my email disabled, my keycard deactivated before I even hit the elevator. I sat in my car in the parking garage for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding in my throat. I wasn't just angry. I was gutted. Not just because I'd been fired, though that hurt, but because I'd let him use me, because I'd seen it coming and still gave everything I had. Driving home through the sleet, my thoughts were on Ellie, the rent, tuition, the braces I still needed to pay for. I remembered the months working until 1 a.m., waking up with my laptop still open beside me, nights when Ellie ate dinner alone while I finished just one more task. I recalled when he told me, "You don't have a killer instinct, Claire. That's what's holding you back." He was wrong that night. As the city froze outside my window, I opened my personal laptop and logged into my cloud archive. I'd saved every draft of the Fallner proposal, every edit, every note, including the original concept sketch with my name and timestamp. I wasn't trying to be strategic. I just believe in backing up my work. What I didn't know then, and what he didn't know, was that the head of Fallner Industries, Sophia Lynn, was a former client of mine. We'd worked together 6 years earlier when she ran her startup. She once told me, "If you ever need a real opportunity, call me. The people who build things deserve more than the people who sell them." I never called, but maybe it was time. Staring at my inbox, her name sat at the top of my contacts like a forgotten promise. I clicked, "Compose." Subject: "The real author of your proposal, Sophia. I hope this finds you well. You may not remember me, but we worked together during your early funding round. I'm writing because I recently left Carson & Blake, and there's something you should know about the Fallner proposal." My fingers hovered over send. What I didn't realize then was that this one email would trigger a chain reaction that would unravel the very company that thought it could erase me. By week's end, I'd be sitting across from my former boss, not as an employee, but as his client. As I pressed send, my hands shook. It wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. The kind that comes when you finally stand up after being knocked down too many times. I didn't know if Sophia would even read the email, let alone reply. but at least I'd spoken. At least I hadn't disappeared quietly, like they expected that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the silence broken only by Ellie's soft breathing from the next room. She'd fallen asleep on the couch, waiting for me to come out. I hadn't told her what happened yet. I didn't want to scare her, not until I knew what was coming next. At 7:02 a.m. the next morning, my phone buzzed Sophia Lynn. "Claire, of course I remember you. I still use the growth model you built for our Series B funding round. Thanks for reaching out. Let's talk. I have some questions and an opportunity I think you'll want to hear about." I sat up so fast I almost spilled my coffee. Sophia Lynn wasn't just Fallner Industries' CEO now. She was a rising star in tech, known for being sharp, ethical, and unafraid to shake things up. If she wanted to talk, this was no mere courtesy. That afternoon, I called her assistant, connected me immediately. "Claire," Sophia said, her voice calm but clipped, "I've reviewed the documents you sent." There was a pause long enough for me to brace myself, and I'm livid. I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "I thought you should know the proposal wasn't written by the person who presented it to you. That was my work." "Of course it was," she said. "I recognized it the moment I saw the wording. It had your fingerprints all over it." She asked sharp, detailed questions about the research, the data modeling, even how I'd structured the risk mitigation plan. I answered easily, not because I'd rehearsed, but because it was mine. Every piece of it. "Claire," she said finally, "I'm terminating the contract with Carson and Blake effective immediately." My heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I don't do business with liars," she said, then added, "and I don't reward theft, but I don't believe in letting great work go to waste either. We still need the strategy implemented." She mentioned she was already planning to launch a new venture. She offered me a deal. "Come in as a partner and CEO. It's yours if you want it," she said. I blinked, speechless. "You've always had a builder's mind, Claire," she added. "You just never had the chance to lead. I can give you that, but I need an answer fast. I want us to hit the ground running." I stayed silent for a long moment before finally saying, "I need to think about it," though deep down, my heart already knew. "I understand," she replied, "but don't take too long. You deserve more than being a footnote in someone else's story." After we hung up, I sat quietly with the phone still in my hand, thinking, me, CEO. My mind replayed all the late nights, the overlooked contributions, the patronizing feedback. I kept hearing that phrase that haunted me since yesterday. This is how the real world works. He was right. In a way, the real world did operate like that, until someone decided it wouldn't anymore. That night, I told Ellie everything. She sat cross-legged on my bed, wrapped in her favorite oversized hoodie. "They fired you?" she asked, eyes wide. "But you work harder than anyone." "I know," I said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "But it's okay, something better might be coming." She studied me with the seriousness only a 13-year-old forced to grow up too soon can have. "Are you scared?" "Yes," I admitted honestly, "but I'm ready too." The next morning, I called Sophia. "I'm in." "Good," she said. "Your new title is CEO of Lynn Harper Consulting. The paperwork is already in motion." 2 hours later, the news broke. Fallner Industries canceled their contract with Carson and Blake, citing leadership concerns. Insiders said the company was blindsided. I smiled, imagining my former boss's face when he saw the headline. But that was just the start. The next day, his assistant tried to arrange a call with Fallner to salvage the partnership. Sophia forwarded me the email with a short note. "He wants to speak with the CEO. Your move." So the following morning, when the call finally connected and his voice sounded panicked and desperate, I took a breath, straightened up, and said the words I'd been waiting for. "This is Claire Harper. You're speaking with the new CEO." Silence crackled on the other end. I heard only shallow breathing at first. "Claire," he finally said, I wasn't expecting you." "I figured," I replied evenly. "You were trying to reach the CEO of Lynn Harper Consulting." "That's me now." He gave a weak chuckle, the kind someone uses when scrambling to control a situation they've already lost. "Look, Claire, this must be some kind of misunderstanding. I didn't know there was an issue between you and Carson and Blake. Had I known you were still involved, I would have handled things differently." I let that hang for a moment, the audacity. You didn't know? I said slowly. You removed my name from the final Fallner proposal. You presented my work as your own. Then you fired me 2 days later. But you didn't know there was an issue. His tone shifted, defensive. I was under pressure. The board demanded cuts. I had to make tough calls. You know how this business works. And honestly, Claire, you're a talented analyst, but leadership was never your strength. That stung more than I expected, not because I believed him, but because it echoed the same refrain I'd heard for years. Too quiet, too methodical, too precise, too much, but never enough. You made a mistake, he went on. And I'm not just talking about walking away. You're burning bridges you might need later. Think about your future. Think about your daughter. That was the moment I felt the tone shift. He was weaponizing my child against me. You don't get to bring my daughter into this, I said, voice colder now. And I'm not burning bridges, I'm building my own. After a long pause came a deep sigh. You used to be different, he said. You used to be grateful. That word, grateful, as if everything I'd earned was a favor. I was never grateful for how I was treated, I said firmly. I was committed and loyal, but that loyalty ended the day you decided I was disposable. I'm not the one who should worry about the future, you are. I ended the call. That same day, Sophia and I met in her downtown office, sleek, modern, flooded with light. But it wasn't the design that struck me. It was the energy everyone moved with purpose. It felt alive. You handled that perfectly, she said, after I recounted the call. But brace yourself, people like that don't go quietly. She was right. By Thursday, stories began to spread, first on LinkedIn, then through internal channels where I still had contacts. He spun a new narrative that I left voluntarily after underperforming, that I was bitter, unstable, and difficult to manage. It was all so familiar, so predictable. I spent the afternoon combing through my records, emails, project logs, performance reviews. For 5 years, I had documented everything, not because I expected to need it, but because I'm the type of person who always keeps the receipts that night. I got a message from Julia, a former colleague. Claire, I don't know if you've seen what's being said, but I want you to know I've got your back. We all know the truth. If you ever need a witness, I'm in. She wasn't alone over the next 2 days. More than a dozen former coworkers reached out, sharing similar stories. Credit stolen, promotions denied, voices ignored. Many had been too scared to speak up. Some were still quietly enduring. You were the first to walk away, Julia said. But now that you have, some of us are ready to follow. By week's end, I had more than just support. I had proof, documentation, screenshots, messages, internal memos, a puzzle revealing years of manipulation, mismanagement, and unethical conduct. The best part? I didn't have to use any of it. The board at Carson & Blake was already growing uneasy. Monday morning brought a notice on their investor page. The Fallner contract was officially terminated, revenue projections revised downward, and stock value had dropped 6% by midday. Then came the email I hadn't expected. Claire, this is confidential, but the board is investigating leadership conduct. Several partners have raised concerns about how key accounts, including Fallner, were handled. There's talk of leadership change. You didn't just walk away. You exposed something we've all been ignoring. I read it 3 times before closing my laptop. My hands were steady now. He said I'd made a mistake, but it was starting to look like the only mistake I made was staying as long as I did. By the next week, the whispers turned into headlines. The headline blared, Leading consulting firm loses key client amid leadership turmoil. Carson & Blake scramble following executive upheaval. From my home office, I watched the updates roll in. Laptop open, phone buzzing with an endless stream of notifications. Each message felt like a quiet vindication, not from a desire for revenge, but because the truth they'd tried so hard to bury was finally breaking through. At Lynn Harper Consulting, momentum was building rapidly. Sophia and I were assembling a team of talented, sharp professionals. Some had left Carson & Blake soon after I did. Others came through Sophia's connections. Every individual shared the same passion to create something honest, ethical, and outstanding. For the first time in years, I wasn't simply executing someone else's plans. I was drafting the foundation. Yet, a nagging sense lingered. Something else was on the horizon. My old boss, let's call him Matt, never accepted defeat quietly. Never then on that Friday, my lawyer Dana called with a blunt warning. "You won't like this," she said. "Go ahead." I braced myself. "Carson and Blake have filed a cease and desist against you. They claim you misused proprietary info from your time there to start your business and lure their client away." I chuckled, not because it was amusing, but because it was utterly foreseeable. "You mean the client whose contract I drafted, whose strategy I devised, and who was already my contact before I joined Carson and Blake?" Dana snorted. "Exactly. It's a scare tactic. They want you to panic, settle quietly, or just fold." "Let them try," I said firmly. "We have everything documented." "That we do," she agreed. "But we need to act preemptively. We're filing a countersuit. Defamation, wrongful termination, professional misrepresentation. We're also including sworn statements from your former colleagues. Several have already signed." I leaned back, gazing at the city skyline. The surreal truth hit me. A month ago, I was fighting to keep my job. Now I was defending my reputation legally and reclaiming my story. But what truly amazed me wasn't how fast it escalated. It was the overwhelming support Nathan, a senior analyst I'd mentored, messaged late that night. "Claire, I've stayed silent too long. I knew what Matt was doing." "We all did." "You were the reason our strategy succeeded. He took the credit. I've attached a timeline showing where your name was erased or replaced in company documents. Use it as you need." Then Alicia, a former HR rep who'd left 6 months before me, sent a note. "Matt pushed to alter your performance reviews the quarter before you were let go. I have the originals. You were rated exceeds expectations before it was downgraded to meets expectations. They were prepping to remove you." I mulled over that truth for hours. Even knowing their deception, it stung. Not because I believed their lies, but because their erasure was so calculated they hadn't just exploited me. They'd wiped me out piece by piece, however. I was reclaiming the space they tried to deny me. Dana acted swiftly within days. She filed our response with proof of my original work, email exchanges with Sophia, and sworn testimonies from 5 former employees, all ready to testify. The cease and desist was withdrawn within 48 hours. No apology, no explanation, just silence. The clearest admission of guilt imaginable. The following week, Sophia and I presented our launch deck to potential investors, a consulting firm grounded in integrity, founded by women, prioritizing sustainable strategies over quick wins. The atmosphere buzzed with energy. We secured 2 contracts that very afternoon. Riding the elevator up, a surge of pride, disbelief, and a quiet grief washed over me for the years I'd waited for permission to lead. I'd always believed the system would hold, the walls too rigid, too entrenched. But sometimes the foundation forgets it's propped up by the people who do the work. And when those people walk away, the whole structure trembles. Later that evening, I picked Ellie up from school. She sprinted to the car, beaming with that wide, toothy grin. "How was your day?" I asked. She buckled her seatbelt and looked at me. "My teacher asked who inspires me most. I said you." I fought to keep my throat from tightening. "Why me?" "Because you didn't let them stop you, and because now you're the boss." I smiled, eyes stinging, not just because she saw me, but because for the first time, I could see myself clearly too. By month's end, Lynn Harper Consulting was making waves. We onboarded 2 major clients, one directly competing with Carson and Blake. The irony was not lost on me. The very firm that once said I lacked executive presence was now sidelined while I led strategy calls with Fortune 500 decision-makers. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming space and redefining leadership. Then something shifted when the first media outlet called the article titled, "From Discarded to Disruptor, the woman who turned her firing into a CEO role," revealed it all. The reporter had done her homework. She knew about the Fallner contract, my termination, and even referenced leaked internal memos. "I'm not looking for a fight," I told her during our interview, "but I'm tired of pretending what happened was normal. It wasn't. And I'm not alone." Once published, the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from women, former employees, even strangers. Your story is mine. Different names, same playbook. I've been silent too long. Thank you. I should have felt empowered, proud. But instead, something tightened inside. Because with each message, I realized how widespread the damage was. It wasn't just me, it never had been. And now, all eyes were on us, including Carson and Blake. 2 days after the article appeared, Dana called again. They've hired a crisis management firm, she said. They're trying to get ahead of this. A public statement might be coming soon. Let them, I said. But it wasn't just a statement. It became a full campaign. Carson and Blake published a blog post titled, Moving Forward, Learning from the Past and Building Stronger, filled with vague references to miscommunications, team transitions, and internal improvements. They never named me, but everyone knew who they meant. Then Matt resurfaced in a podcast interview. Of course, he said smoothly, people today are quick to point fingers. Look, I've made mistakes. Everyone has. But the truth is, not everyone can handle the pressures of leadership. Sometimes decisions are misread when they're just part of running a business. It was so perfectly rehearsed, I almost laughed. Yet what came next caught me off guard. That very night, a message popped up from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Nina Rhodes, former senior partner and co-founder of Carson and Blake. She retired quietly before I even became senior strategist, but her name still carried clout in the industry. Her message was brief. Claire, I've been following what's happening. I believe you. If you're open, I'd like to meet. We met for coffee in a quiet Lincoln Park cafe. She looked older than I remembered, but her presence still commanded respect. I stepped down before Matt took full control, she said. I saw some decisions being made and knew I didn't want to be part of that direction, but I never expected it to unravel this fast. You knew? I asked. She nodded. I suspected, but lacked proof, and I wasn't brave enough to dig deeper. I studied her face. No performance there, just regret. You weren't the only one he tried to erase, she continued. You were simply the first to hold him accountable. Reaching into her bag, she handed me a flash drive. These are internal evaluations, meeting transcripts, and board communications from my final 6 months at the firm. I think they'll back your case if you want to take it further. My heart pounded. Why now? Because it's time truth had more advocates than excuses, she said plainly. And because you reminded me what real leadership looks like. We sat quietly, a moment shared by two women from different chapters of the same story. One walking away from a legacy, the other reclaiming her own. That night, I opened the drive. She wasn't exaggerating. Memos revealed deliberate manipulation of performance reviews, transcripts of strategy meetings where Matt spoke of using layoffs as distractions during PR crises, even a draft board presentation titled Restructure Plan, quietly replace high-risk staff before IPO. I wasn't labeled a risk for performance reasons. I was a risk because I knew too much and asked too many questions. The next morning, I sent the materials to Dana. Her reply came within 3 minutes. We need to go public. This is no longer just your story, it's systemic. Are you ready? I stared at her words. Ready? Prepared? Absolutely. The decision wasn't made lightly. That weekend, I reviewed everything with Dana, line by line, file by file, to ensure every document, timeline, and name was accurate. We weren't just exposing wrongdoing, we were setting a precedent. By Monday morning, the story was submitted to the Wall Street Ledger. Accompanied by a full evidence file, we also filed a formal complaint with the state's Department of Labor and the SEC, citing patterns of employee misrepresentation and fraudulent disclosures during performance review periods. I thought I'd be terrified when it went live, but instead, I felt calm, focused, and free. Within hours, the article went viral. Consulting giant accused of systemic retaliation against whistleblowers. Internal documents leaked from CEO to scapegoat. The collapse of Carson and Blake's culture. Former strategist Claire Harper sparks industry reckoning. Suddenly, I was the story. Not the woman who was fired, but the woman who refused to be erased. My phone didn't stop buzzing for 3 days. Journalists, former employees, women in consulting from New York to San Francisco. Some called it courageous, others career suicide. For me, it was neither. It was necessary. On Wednesday morning, Sophia walked into my office carrying 2 coffees and a wide smile. "You broke the internet," she said, placing a cup before me. "I didn't mean to," I replied. "Exactly why it worked." She studied my face. "How are you really?" "Exhausted but strong," I paused. "I knew you'd be the one to change things," she said softly, "but I didn't expect the ripple effect." She wasn't exaggerating. Within a week, 2 senior executives resigned from Carson, and Blake anonymous sources confirmed the board had known about internal misconduct for years and downplayed concerns. A former HR director came forward on record, confirming systematic efforts to downgrade performance reviews and silence employees who spoke up. The firm's legal counsel announced a top-to-bottom restructuring. Matt was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. His LinkedIn profile disappeared overnight. No posts, no spin, just silence. I didn't gloat. Not for a second. Because this was never about revenge, it was about recognition. For hundreds of employees like me, quiet builders and invisible architects who make things work behind the scenes, only to be dismissed without a second thought, it was about rewriting the ending for ourselves and for each other. That Friday evening, Ellie and I sat on the porch. The air was warm for spring, the sky painted orange and purple. "Mom," she said, looking up from her phone, "you're on TV again." I chuckled. "I know, getting tired of seeing my face." "No," she said, leaning on my shoulder. "I think it's cool. You didn't let them treat you like you didn't matter." I kissed the top of her head, feeling the weight of what that meant, not just for me, but for what she now believed was possible in her own life. Later that night, I sat at my desk staring at an invitation from a Boston university. They wanted me to speak at their annual Women in Leadership Summit, with a talk titled, "How to Be the Architect of Your Own Power." I accepted, not for the spotlight, but because someone needed to say it out loud. The way things have always been doesn't have to be the way they stay. The following month, Carson and Blake settled the case confidentially. The agreement included a financial settlement, a public apology, and the resignation of 3 additional partners. More importantly, it mandated new employee protections, an independent ethics board, and quarterly transparency reports. It wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. As part of the settlement, I refused a non-disclosure agreement. If they thought they could buy my silence, they'd underestimated me. I remained CEO of Lynn Harper Consulting, leading the firm into its 2nd year with a new client portfolio, a reputation for integrity, and a waiting list of eager applicants. But most importantly, I stayed visible, because stories like mine only matter when they're told. When they remind others their experiences aren't isolated, that silence isn't the price of survival, that we get to decide when our story ends. For me, this was not the end. It was just the beginning.